First off, we would like to thank Dr. Frimpong for meeting with us today. Today we are interviewing him. He is an assistant professor of fisheries science at Virginia Tech. He originally went to school at the University of Science and Technology in Ghana. Then he went on to receive masters from the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff and also Virginia Tech. He received his doctorate at Purdue University, and he currently conducts research with graduate students in both Ghana and the U.S. Dr. Frimpong, what inspired you to become a fisheries scientist?
My background is in conservation, and I have been trained at the undergraduate level to be broadly trained to be a natural resource conservationist, both fisheries and wildlife and also forestry. And my love for fish is what steered me eventually into fisheries science.
How is it different to go to university in Ghana?
Well, you know, Ghana is a developing country and has much limited resources relative to the United States. The curriculum are very similar to the curriculum you have here, but there is a great deal of emphasis on theory relative to practice in Ghana, and as it is in many developing countries, because the access to laboratories and equipment and so forth is much more limited. So my experience has been you learn remotely about many things and you don't necessarily have the opportunity to do it hands-on compared to the US, where you have more hands-on experience in your undergrad training.
What made you want to come to the US?
So my original intent after my bachelor's was to get a graduate degree. And a graduate degree in fisheries science and aquaculture is not available, or was not at the time of my aspiring to be a specialist in fisheries and aquaculture. It was not necessarily only the US that was on my list of possibilities. I looked at options in Canada and other places in Europe, but the opportunity came from the US, and so that's how I ended up in the US.
In your lab, you do research in both the US and Africa. How is it different dealing with the two governments when it comes to government grants and government-funded research?
So I do my research in Africa, actually across countries. I have projects currently in Kenya, Tanzania, and Ghana. And so I don't deal with one particular government. My research goes primarily through the universities, and then we work with the ministries. So I don't have a very direct contact with government officials, except when we are involving them in our research. But the memoranda of understanding that we put in place and signed by the universities here and the universities in Africa that are working together, signed, clears any government issues, hindrances that may be in our way when we want to take projects to Africa. But my research funding is actually from the US. It's the US Agency for International Development that funds my research in Africa as well. The government in Africa only supports these research initiatives in kind, not in cash, by providing personnel, by providing some infrastructure and facilitating research on the ground.
How do you coordinate your research, both doing research in Africa and the US simultaneously?
It's challenging, I have to tell you, but if you are passionate about what you do, it all sort of fits together. I have students working in Africa on my African projects who are graduate students here at Virginia Tech, and I have students who are working on my US projects. So the students really are my instruments, and I supervise what they do by being on the ground when they need me. And because the focus of my research is similar, they are all tied together by environment and sustainability of management of natural resources, whether it's in agriculture or it's in fisheries science. I don't have to turn on another part of my brain to think of my African project versus American project. They are really one whole, and it's as challenging, I think, to juggle multiple projects here in the US, as it is to juggle some projects in the US and some projects in Africa, which every professor has to do. You usually have more than one project going on, and you just have to make sure that they all fit together somehow under a broader theme.
How do you balance fisheries management with local needs in developing countries like Ghana or Tanzania or Kenya?
So you would have to separate somewhat in your mind fisheries management from fish conservation, which I think the emphasis of developing countries is in fisheries management, but to some extent also conservation is important over there. Local needs for fisheries resources in general in developing countries is for the provisioning of food, for example, fiber for forests, and so it's the same fisheries management you do over here that you would do in say Africa, but the emphasis is not on providing quality recreational resources, for example, but in providing quality food from the resource base, and so that is a need. The food is a need, and our goal is to teach them how to manage their resource and also learn to grow their resource. That's part of my work is agriculture. Grow the resource so that the dependence on the natural resource is not too heavy to deplete the resource, so that natural resource base supports the cultivation of the natural resource, which is in the case of fisheries, is cultivation of fishes, or agriculture. And the conservation underpinning of this is that if local people learn to cultivate fish rather than depend on the natural stocks, then the natural stocks will be conserved as the bank to provide the continuing support for producing fish from a domestic sort of industry instead of being like a fishing industry.